Picture this. You're standing in the doorway of your bedroom. Your heart is racing. Your breathing is shallow. Right there, on the bed, is a massive, tangled pile of clean laundry. You know you need to fold it. You desperately want to fold it. But you can't move. You are physically locked in place. Welcome to this explainer. Today we're dissecting the pathology of space. We're looking at why our physical environments aren't just innocent backdrops. They are active neurological battlegrounds.
So we have to ask the question, why does a messy room actually hurt? For decades, society has framed a messy room as a moral failing, right? A sign of a weak character. But what if we completely subvert that expectation? What if a messy room isn't a character flaw at all, but a literal biological threat to your nervous system?
Well, the truth is it hurts because your brain is under attack. Incredible research from the Princeton University Neuroscience Institute reveals that visual clutter triggers a violent competition in your visual cortex. Every single object left out is a visual stimulus literally screaming for your attention. And to suppress all that noise, your prefrontal cortex has to burn massive amounts of metabolic energy. Your brain is essentially being drained just by looking at the chaos.
And the systemic trauma of this sensory overload doesn't just stop in the brain. Leaving that clutter unmanaged keeps your body's stress response system firing continuously. Your cortisol levels never drop. You are trapped in this low-grade, constant state of fight or flight. The result? Total exhaustion, severely disrupted sleep, and a staggering 77% higher likelihood of obesity. Your body ends up consuming twice as much junk food just to biochemically cope with the environmental stress.
But there's a really dark twist to this neurobiology. A landmark study from UCLA's Center on Everyday Lives of Families found that this massive cortisol spike disproportionately affects women. Why? Well, it comes down to socialized cognitive filters. While a man might look at a table and just see a pile of mail, the female brain, primed by years of societal expectations, perceives that exact same clutter as a constant looming threat of unfinished labor and social judgment. It acts as a silent environmental pressure cooker.
Let's move into Section 1, the myth of laziness.
We really need to understand that executive dysfunction isn't some quirky personality trait. It is a severe neurological blockade. In brains dealing with conditions like ADHD, depression, or chronic burnout, there is a literal depletion of dopamine in the system, and dopamine is the chemical required to initiate tasks. You combine that depletion with working memory deficits, and the simple act of tidying a room becomes a cognitive impossibility.
So it isn't a choice, it's an executive freeze. Imagine your brain suddenly flooded with hundreds of competing micro-decisions. Where does this specific piece of paper go? Should I clean the desk first, or do I start with the floor? The sheer volume of choices completely overloads the system. Decision fatigue instantly sets in, and the body physically locks up. This is the visceral horror of ADHD paralysis.
Listen to this quote from a patient. "I'm frozen. I feel paralyzed by simple decisions. I just can't get myself to do it." There is a deep shame and an intense isolation suffered by the chronically disorganized. They genuinely want to clean. They just medically cannot start.
But that raises a fascinating mystery. If a messy brain is paralyzed by a lack of dopamine, what happens at the exact opposite end of the spectrum? We have to contrast the task paralysis of a chaotic space against the terrifying amygdala-driven reactivity of a perfectly ordered one.
Which brings us to Section 2, the disease of perfect order.
Enter maladaptive perfectionism. For what psychologists call the conscientious controller, obsessive spatial organization isn't actually about being tidy. It's a behavioral defense mechanism. They use absolute, rigid control over their physical environment to self-medicate underlying OCD or generalized anxiety. They control the room because they cannot control their own mind.
But this rigid control, it is fatal. The biological cost of flawlessness is incredibly severe. The perfectionist's brain literally treats a misplaced object as a life-or-death threat, triggering constant amygdala hyperreactivity. They are flooded with cortisol and adrenaline. They suffer from chronic muscle tension, relentless insomnia, and an accelerated risk of cardiovascular disease. The hyper-organized are quite literally being destroyed from the inside out.
The cure, it turned out, was worse than the disease. We're left trapped. Think about it. On one side, you have the toxic, cortisol-spiking paralysis of absolute chaos. On the other, the fatal, heart-stopping exhaustion of absolute order.
So let's explore Section 3, the genius of disorder. If both of these extremes are biological threats, what kind of environment does the human brain actually require to thrive? The famous Kathleen Voss experiments from the Carlson School of Management give us a massive clue.
They found that participants placed in meticulously clean rooms donated 82% of their money to charity and consistently chose healthy snacks. Meticulously clean spaces prime the brain to follow the rules and to play it entirely safe. But here is the dramatic twist. When researchers asked those same groups to solve complex problems or choose new products, the messy room group absolutely obliterated the clean room group in divergent thinking. Physical disorder actively stimulates a release from tradition. A slightly messy room unconsciously tells the brain that the rules are suspended, which sparks incredible out-of-the-box creativity.
We call this the Brownian search efficiency model, and it proves the absolute genius of a moderate, functional mess. Look, constantly filing every single piece of paper takes massive amounts of upfront mental energy. But letting things form organic, chronological piles where the most important stuff naturally just floats to the top, that preserves your brain's metabolic resources. And it sparks serendipitous creativity.
This leads us to our final act. Section 4, Finding Functional Equilibrium.
As habit expert James Clear famously states, you do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. Raw willpower is completely, utterly useless against environmental neurobiology. If you're dealing with executive dysfunction, just trying harder is never going to work. You have to change the system.
So here is your neurocompatible blueprint to fix this. First, bypass that executive freeze with 10-minute micro-habits. Don't tell yourself to clean the house, just clean one single drawer. Second, use implementation intentions. Decide the exact time and location you will tidy. Third, habit stack this onto something you already do every single day, like sorting your mail while the morning coffee brews. And finally, number 4, accept moderate mess. Stop chasing this sterile hospital-level perfection. Allow a little functional disorder to act as a crucial cognitive release valve for your mind. Because here's the bottom line. Your physical environment is never just a backdrop. It is intimately, inextricably wired into your neurobiology, your stress hormones, and your daily survival. Look around the room you are sitting in right now. I want you to ask yourself one dark, lingering question. Is your space protecting your peace, or is it silently fueling your panic? Think about that. Thank you for joining me for this explainer.